The station was crowded with ships, but the two children never noticed. They were too busy huddling in the corner, wrapped in threadbare coats, their eyes darting from one passing figure to the next. Errol and Rai, the twin Cathar orphans, had learned long ago to keep quiet and out of sight. People in the market district had no patience for the likes of them. Hungry, ragged, and foreign. Their home, once a thriving world of green landscapes and peaceful cities, had long since been destroyed by an empire that saw them as a threat. The Cathar were known for their intelligence, their advanced technology, and their royal lineage, but to the rest of the galaxy, that was a reason to erase them from existence. The twins were the last of their kind. They had barely escaped when the planet fell, and now only the memory of their once glorious civilization remained. The Empire's bounty hunters had been hunting them ever since, chasing them across the stars, trying to end their bloodline for good. "Keep your head down," Errol whispered to her brother. Her voice was a soft warning, the kind that only twins shared, words that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Her golden eyes flicked nervously to the bustling spaceport. Rai nodded, tightening the tattered scarf around his neck. He knew exactly what she meant. They had to stay invisible. They had to stay safe. The twins' survival depended on it. Despite their fear, they moved with a practiced fluidity, slipping through the crowd like shadows. Errol's sharp eyes scanned every face, every movement. Her ears, pointed and keen, picked up the slightest sound, always alert to the dangers that surrounded them. Rai was no different, though he was the quieter of the two. He focused more on what was ahead of them, always thinking 2 steps ahead. The station was a place of strange faces, with species from all over the galaxy coming and going. The twins didn't belong here, but there was nowhere else for them to go. It was either hide in plain sight or face the risk of being caught. The small spaceport was the best chance they had at blending in, though it wasn't without its dangers. There were always bounty hunters, looking for a reward. Errol stopped, her body tense, and held her brother's arm. Rai felt the pressure of her grip and looked around, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel it too. Something was wrong. "Move," Errol whispered urgently, tugging on his sleeve. They began walking faster, glancing over their shoulders, but it was too late. A group of heavily armed mercenaries stepped into their path, blocking their way. The twins froze, their hearts racing. "We've been looking for you," one of the mercenaries said with a cruel smile. He was tall, with scales that shimmered like polished metal, his eyes cold and calculating. His hand rested on the hilt of a weapon that looked capable of ending a life in an instant. Rai instinctively grabbed Errol's hand, pulling her closer. His mind raced, but his body was frozen. They had trained for moments like this. They knew how to fight, but they didn't have the numbers or the resources to stand against a group like this. The mercenaries were here for one reason: the reward for the twins' capture. "Please," Errol said, her voice shaking, but only a little. She had learned to sound weak when it might save their lives. She pulled on Rai's sleeve, urging him to move. "We don't have any credits. Just let us go." The leader of the mercenaries laughed. "You think you can talk your way out of this? You're worth a fortune, little ones. Don't waste our time." Rai glanced around. There had to be a way out. His mind worked quickly, analyzing the spaceport. He could see the exits, but the mercenaries were blocking them. They needed a distraction. His eyes flicked to the side, where an old maintenance panel hung slightly open. If they could reach it. Without thinking, he yanked Errol's arm and bolted. The mercenaries shouted in surprise, but it was too late. The twins darted between the stalls, running for the maintenance panel. Errol's breath came in short gasps as they squeezed through narrow spaces, dodging the crowd. Rai's plan was risky, but it was their only chance. They reached the panel, and with a burst of adrenaline, Rai yanked it open. He slipped through first, pulling Errol in behind him. The two of them crawled through the cramped passageways beneath the station, knowing they had only seconds before the mercenaries would catch up. As they ran deeper into the bowels of the station, Eryl's heart hammered in her chest. They had escaped this time, but the fear never left. The galaxy was vast, and the twins had nowhere to hide. They were running out of places to go, and the hunters were always a step behind. But for now, they were free. Jacob Ellis had long since given up on adventure. Once a soldier in the intergalactic wars, he had seen more than his share of violence and bloodshed. But after the war ended, he left it all behind, choosing to live quietly on Earth. Now, he spent his days fixing broken ships at a small mechanic shop on the outskirts of a busy city. His life was simple, peaceful, and he liked it that way. One rainy evening, as he was closing up for the day, a soft knock on the door interrupted his routine. Jacob frowned, wondering who would be visiting at this hour. He opened the door, and there, standing in the shadows of the alley, were two children. At first, Jacob thought they were lost, but as he looked closer, he noticed something strange. Their clothes were torn, their faces dirty, but it wasn't just that. Their eyes, bright, intelligent, and full of fear, were unlike any human child he had ever seen. And the way they moved, quick and precise, made him think that these weren't ordinary kids. "Are you okay?" Jacob asked, his voice softer than usual. The twins didn't answer right away, but he could see the fear in their eyes. The girl, who looked a little older, seemed to be the one in charge. She held tightly to her brother's arm, her gaze darting nervously around. "Please, we need help," the girl whispered. Her voice was hesitant, but there was a quiet urgency in it that made Jacob's heart sink. Without thinking, Jacob stepped aside and let them in. The twins hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the warmth of the shop. The door clicked shut behind them, and they stood in the middle of the room, clearly out of place. Jacob frowned, wondering who they were running from. They didn't look like the usual runaways. These children were different. "Who's chasing you?" Jacob asked, his voice full of concern. The girl, who seemed to be the older twin, shook her head, her golden eyes flashing with fear. "We can't stay here. They'll find us." Jacob didn't press further. He could see they were scared, and he wasn't the kind to push someone in distress. He moved to the counter, where he kept his old datapad, and handed it to the boy. "You need food, don't you? I can get you something." The boy, Ra, nodded, but his gaze never left the door. "We're not safe here," he said softly. "They'll track us down." Jacob couldn't help but wonder who would go to such lengths to track down two kids, and who were they really? They didn't look like ordinary children, but he had seen enough strange things during his time as a soldier to know that looks could be deceiving. Still, he needed answers. "Where are you from?" Jacob asked, trying to keep his tone light. He didn't want to scare them more than they already were. The girl spoke up this time. We're from far away, a long way from here." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "And how did you end up on Earth?" We don't know," the girl replied, her voice trembling slightly. "We've been running for so long, we lost track of time." Jacob looked at the two of them, Eryl and Ray. There was something about them, something more than just the fear in their eyes. They weren't like any children he had ever met. They had an odd way of speaking, as though they were used to commanding respect. Though they were so young, they carried themselves with an air of authority, as if they were meant for something more than just hiding in a mechanic's shop. Jacob was no stranger to danger, but something about this felt different. He had always trusted his instincts, and right now, they were telling him that there was more to these kids than met the eye. He needed to get answers, but before he could ask more, there was a sound, distant at first, but growing louder, the low hum of an engine. Jacob froze, his heart skipping a beat. He knew that sound. It was the unmistakable hum of a ship's engines, and it was closing in fast. The twins had heard it too. Eryl grabbed Ray's hand, her face going pale. "They're here," she whispered. "They found us." Jacob's mind raced. He didn't know who they were, But one thing was clear. Whatever danger was chasing these children, it was real, and it was getting closer. He didn't have much time. Without thinking, Jacob grabbed the twins' hands. "Stay close," he said, his voice firm. "I've got a place. Follow me." He didn't wait for a response. Turning quickly, he led them through the back of the shop and into a hidden alleyway that led to a basement. The only thing he knew for sure was that whatever came next, he couldn't let these kids face it alone. Jacob didn't stop running. His boots echoed through the narrow alley, the sound muffled by the rain that had begun to pour down in sheets. The twins followed closely, their feet light but quick. Eril kept her grip tight on Ray's hand, her golden eyes scanning the shadows, while Ray's expression was hard to read, a mixture of fear and determination. Jacob's heart pounded as he pushed open the door to the basement. He hurried the twins inside, locking the door behind them. The small room was cluttered with old crates, spare parts, and tools. Nothing fancy, but it was safe. Jacob moved to the far corner and pulled open a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a narrow passageway that led deeper beneath the building. "Come on, quickly," he urged, motioning for them to follow. The twins hesitated for a moment, exchanging a glance, but then they both nodded and slipped into the passage. Jacob didn't know what he was getting himself into, but there was something about the twins that made him feel responsible for them, as though their safety now rested on his shoulders. His instincts told him to protect them, no questions asked. He didn't know who was after them or why, but he wasn't about to let anyone hurt these kids. They had already been through too much. The passage was long and dark, the air thick with the smell of dust and old metal. As they walked deeper, Jacob began to feel the weight of the situation. The sound of the engines from earlier still rang in his ears. Whoever was chasing the twins was close, too close. Once they reached the end of the passage, Jacob led them into a small, hidden room beneath the shop. It was a perfect hideout, one he had used during his time as a soldier to escape when things got rough. He knew the area well, but he also knew it wouldn't be long before those chasing the twins would find their way here. Eril and Ray sat on the floor, their backs pressed against the cold stone walls, their faces tired but alert. Jacob pulled up a chair and sat across from them, studying the twins in silence for a moment. He had seen a lot in his life, but nothing had prepared him for this. These kids were different. He could feel it, deep in his bones. "All right," Jacob said, breaking the silence. "Who's after you? And why?" Eril looked at him, her eyes guarded. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "They're not just after us. They're after everything we represent." Ra nodded, his voice low but steady. "We're not just children, Jacob. We come from a place far beyond Earth. Our people, our planet, was destroyed by an empire that wants to erase our entire bloodline. We were the last hope of our people." Jacob frowned, trying to process what they were saying. "You're telling me you're not from Earth?" He leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Then where are you from?" The twins exchanged a glance, and for a moment, Jacob could see the weight of their past in their eyes. Eril spoke first, her voice almost a whisper. "We're from a planet called Cathar. Our species was once powerful and peaceful. We ruled a kingdom that spanned many worlds, until it was destroyed." Ray added, his tone somber, "The Empire came to our world. They attacked, destroyed our cities, and killed our family. We are the last of the Cathar royal bloodline. The Empire wants us dead to ensure that our people never rise again." Jacob's mind was reeling. He had heard of ancient galactic empires, of wars fought across the stars, but this sounded like something out of a legend. Yet, looking at the twins, he could see the truth in their eyes. They weren't lying. They had been born into a world of royalty, only to see it shattered by an empire that now hunted them across the galaxy. "We never wanted to rule," Eril continued, her voice trembling slightly. "We just want to survive. But the Empire won't let us. They've sent bounty hunters after us, and they won't stop until we're gone." Jacob sat back in his chair, absorbing the gravity of their words. His life had been simple. He had fought wars, but that felt like a lifetime ago. Now he was caught up in something far larger, something he couldn't escape, even if he wanted to. "You're telling me," Jacob said slowly, "that you're the last hope of your entire species, and the Empire wants to make sure that hope is gone." Errol nodded, her face solemn. "Yes." Jacob ran a hand through his hair, thinking. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who had wanted peace. But now he was involved in something much bigger than himself. And the twins needed him. "We can't do this alone," Ray said, his voice more certain now. "We need help. We need a place to hide, somewhere the Empire won't find us." Jacob looked at them, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something stir inside him. Something more than just the need to survive. He felt a responsibility, a pull to help these kids. Maybe he couldn't change the galaxy, but he could change their fate. And that was enough for him. "All right," Jacob said, standing up. "I'll help you. I don't know how, but I will." The twins looked at each other, relief flickering in their eyes. It was a small promise, but it was enough to make them feel like they weren't alone in the galaxy anymore. And for Jacob, that was the first step into a world of danger and uncertainty, a world he never thought he would have to face again. But now he had a purpose: to protect the last heirs of a lost kingdom and keep them safe, no matter what. Jacob's heart raced as he looked out the small, grated window of the basement. The storm outside had turned into a torrential downpour, but it offered little comfort. The darkness hid the world, but it didn't hide the danger closing in on them. The hum of engines that had been so faint earlier was now growing louder, vibrating through the walls. Someone was on their trail, and it wouldn't be long before they found the hidden basement. Jacob turned away from the window and faced the twins. They were sitting on the dusty floor, speaking in low, urgent voices. Despite the heavy situation, Errol seemed to be trying to calm her brother, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. But Ray looked troubled, his brow furrowed in concentration. "They'll find us soon," Ray said, his voice tight with frustration. "They're too good at tracking. We don't have much time." Errol nodded, but Jacob could see she was trying to hide her fear. She was the older twin, and she tried to maintain control, but even she knew how serious their situation was. "We need to leave now," Errol said, standing up with determination. "We can't stay here. If we do, we'll be trapped." Jacob stepped forward, holding out his hand. "I can get you out, but it won't be easy. There's a way out of the city, but it's not safe. We'll need to move fast, and we'll need to be careful." Ray looked at him, his golden eyes steady but filled with concern. "Where will we go?" Jacob hesitated for a moment. He wasn't exactly sure where they could go, but he knew one thing: they couldn't stay in the city. The Empire's forces were far too powerful. They needed to find a safe place, a place the Empire wouldn't be able to find. "I have an old contact," Jacob said, pacing back and forth. "Someone who might be able to help. He's far away on a small moon, out of the Empire's reach. It's risky, but it's our best shot." Errol frowned but nodded. "We'll do whatever it takes." Jacob looked at the twins, their resolve matching his own. They had no choice but to trust each other now. It was the only way they would survive. Before they could make any further plans, the sound of boots stomping on the wet pavement outside froze them all. Jacob's instincts kicked in. He rushed to the door and peered through the small crack. The street was deserted, but there was no mistaking the sharp, organized movement of soldiers outside. They weren't just looking for someone. They were searching. Jacob turned back to the twins. "Get ready to move. We need to go now." They didn't waste time asking questions. Errol and Ray scrambled to their feet, grabbing their few belongings. Jacob quickly checked his weapon, an old sidearm, but it would do in a pinch. He shoved it into his jacket and motioned for the twins to follow him. With one last glance at the basement, Jacob led them back into the narrow passage. The rain outside was falling harder, the streets slick with water as they made their way to the back of the shop. Jacob could hear the faint sound of voices now, the enemy soldiers getting closer. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his pace steady. The alleyway was a maze of twists and turns, but Jacob knew it like the back of his hand. They kept moving, staying close to the shadows, until they reached an old, rusted vehicle hidden behind a stack of crates. Jacob unlocked the vehicle with a quick swipe of his hand, and the door creaked open. "Get in," he ordered. The twins climbed inside, and Jacob followed, closing the door behind them. He started the engine, the vehicle rumbling to life. He didn't waste a second before hitting the accelerator, pushing the vehicle forward with a burst of speed. "Hold on," Jacob warned. He glanced at the twins in the rearview mirror, their faces tense but ready. He could tell they were used to danger, and that made him feel a little less anxious. As they sped through the streets, Jacob could hear the faint whine of engines in the distance. Someone was following them. The soldiers hadn't found their hiding spot, but they weren't far behind. Jacob could feel the pressure building in his chest. They had to get out of the city. "Jacob," Errol said, her voice calm but urgent. "Do you know where you're going?" Jacob nodded. "I know the way. Just hang on." The vehicle swerved down a narrow alley, avoiding the main roads. The storm was making it harder to see, but it was also working in their favor. The rain hid their tracks, making it more difficult for anyone to follow. For now, they had a chance. They turned onto an old bridge that led out of the city. Jacob could see the lights of the city behind them, growing smaller. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him a moment of hope. They were getting away. They weren't safe yet, but they were free for now. Jacob kept his eyes on the road ahead, but his mind was already racing. He didn't know what awaited them at their destination, but one thing was certain: this was only the beginning. The Empire wasn't going to stop chasing them, but neither would he. As they drove further into the rain, Jacob glanced. "So, the Empire destroyed your kingdom," Jacob said slowly, "and they're hunting you because you're the only ones left." Errol nodded again, her eyes sad but determined. "Yes, and they'll keep hunting us until we're dead. We're not just children to them. We're the last obstacle in their quest for control over the galaxy." Jacob felt a heavy silence settle over the vehicle. He could feel the weight of their words, the burden they carried. They weren't just fighting for their own survival. They were fighting for the future of their people. "And if you're the last Heirs, what does that mean for you?" "For Cathar?" Jacob asked, his voice full of awe and confusion. Ray looked out the window, his expression distant. "It means everything. Our people's legacy, their culture, their strength, all of it rests on us. We can't let the Empire erase it. We can't let them destroy what was once great." Jacob's mind raced as the reality of the situation hit him. He had agreed to help these kids, but he hadn't realized just how much was at stake. He wasn't just protecting them now. He was part of something much bigger. A galaxy-spanning war, a lost kingdom, and two children who were the last hope of a fallen civilization. For the first time in years, Jacob felt something stir inside him. He had been a soldier once, fighting for causes that seemed distant and meaningless. But now, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for a chance to rebuild, to restore something lost. And he wouldn't stop until he did. Ahead of them, the dark silhouette of the small moon loomed closer, a place where they might find safety, or where they might face even more danger. Whatever happened next, Jacob knew one thing for sure. He was in this fight for the long haul. The small moon loomed ahead, a pale silver disk in the endless black of space. It was quiet, a place forgotten by most, and that's exactly why Jacob had chosen it. Lurael's hideout was somewhere on this moon, and if they could get there safely, they might have a chance. Jacob's hands gripped the wheel tightly as he steered the old vehicle across the rugged terrain. The ground was rocky, uneven and full of hazards. He'd driven on worse, but this moon was isolated. Nothing but abandoned mining camps and a few scattered outposts. Perfect for someone who didn't want to be found. Errol and Ray sat in the back, their faces tense as they looked out the windows. The storm had passed, but the thick clouds still hung overhead, casting everything in an eerie shadow. Despite the long silence, there was a quiet energy in the air. The twins were still processing everything they had told Jacob, and he could see it in their eyes. The weight of their mission, their legacy, it was something they carried silently but heavily. "You're sure Lorel can help?" Errol asked, breaking the silence. Jacob gave a short nod. "He owes me a favor, and he's the kind of guy who can get things done. But we're not out of the woods yet. We still have to get to him. And what if he decides we're too much trouble?" Roy added, his voice low with worry. "What if he betrays us?" Jacob's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, meeting Ray's steady gaze. "I'm not going to let that happen. We'll make sure he knows what's at stake here, but I won't lie to you. He's a dangerous man to deal with. Just stay sharp." The twins didn't respond, but Jacob could see the understanding in their eyes. They were ready for whatever came next, just as they always had been. Minutes turned into hours as they crossed the barren surface of the moon, the landscape stretching endlessly in front of them. The silence was broken only by the crunch of their vehicle's wheels against the rocky terrain and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. The moon had once been a thriving mining colony, but now it was a ghost town. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Jacob slowed the vehicle as a large, hidden entrance appeared on the horizon. It was a massive hangar buried deep into the side of a jagged cliff, half hidden by the dust and rocks. A large rusted sign hung above the entrance, barely legible. Lorel's hideout. Jacob parked the vehicle at the edge of the entrance and turned off the engine. He looked at the twins, his expression serious. "Stay close to me. Lorel doesn't trust anyone, and if we're not careful, he might take us for enemies instead of allies." The twins nodded. They had no choice but to follow Jacob's lead. They stepped out into the cold moonlight, the harsh wind biting at their skin as they walked toward the entrance. Jacob led the way, his boots crunching against the loose dirt beneath them. The air was thin, and the wind carried the smell of rust and decay. It felt like walking into a tomb. As they approached the massive hangar doors, they were met by two armed guards. The men were tall and strong, their faces hidden behind dark visors, their weapons drawn. Jacob held up his hands in a gesture of peace, and the guards did not move. "We're here to see Lorel," Jacob said in a steady voice. "Tell him Jacob's here. He'll know what that means." One of the guards made a low growling noise before he spoke into a small communicator on his wrist. After a long moment, the guard's eyes flicked up to Jacob. "Lorel will see you," the guard said, stepping aside. "But if you're lying, it won't end well for you." Jacob gave a quick nod and motioned for the twins to follow him. They entered the dark, cavernous hangar, and the door closed behind them with a heavy, echoing sound. Inside, the space was dimly lit by flickering overhead lights, revealing a series of crates, old machinery, and rusted tools scattered around the room. At the far end of the hangar, sitting on a raised platform, was Lorel. He was exactly as Jacob remembered him, tall, with a hard face that was impossible to read. His clothes were dark, blending into the shadows of the room. A scar ran down the side of his face, and his eyes, sharp, calculating, never left Jacob. "Well, Lorel's voice was deep and rough. "Jacob, I thought I might never see you again." Jacob gave a short nod but didn't smile. "I need your help." Lorel's eyes shifted to the twins. His gaze was piercing, and Jacob could tell he was sizing them up. "And who are these? They don't look like the usual people you drag in, Jacob." "They're important," Jacob said firmly. "They need to be kept safe. The Empire's hunting them." Lorel's eyes narrowed at the mention of the Empire. "The Empire? You're bringing me into a war, Jacob. You're either desperate or completely insane." Jacob didn't flinch. I'm asking for your help. You owe me. Luriel's lips curled into a slight smile, but there was no warmth in it. I owe you. That's true. But that doesn't mean I'm going to throw myself into a fight with the Empire just because you ask. Jacob stepped forward, leaning in slightly. These kids, Errol and Roy, they're the last heirs of a kingdom that the Empire destroyed. If we don't protect them, there's nothing left. The Empire will wipe out their entire bloodline, and the galaxy will fall further into darkness. Luriel stood, his expression unreadable. And you think I'm the one to protect them? Jacob's voice hardened. Yes, because you're the only one who can. For a long moment, Luriel didn't say anything. He simply looked at Jacob, then at the twins. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. I'll help you, Jacob, he said slowly. But be warned, the Empire won't stop just because we hide in the shadows. If we're going to do this, we need a plan. And we need to be ready for a fight. Jacob nodded, relief flooding through him. Then let's get started. The galaxy was about to change, and Jacob was ready to fight for it, no matter what it took. The room was filled with the low hum of machinery, the flicker of old lights casting shadows on the walls. Jacob stood with his back against a cold metal crate, his eyes fixed on the map Luriel had spread out in front of him. The map was dotted with red markers, each one a potential target, a place where the Empire would strike. Errol and Ray stood nearby, their faces tense but determined. They knew what was coming. The time for hiding was over. Luriel had agreed to help, but now they needed a plan, a way to strike back at the Empire and reclaim what was lost. They couldn't run forever. Luriel paced in front of them, his boots clanking softly on the metal floor. The Empire will be coming for you soon. They've already started their sweep of this moon. We don't have much time before they find us. Jacob didn't flinch. He had known this would happen. The Empire's forces were vast, and they wouldn't stop until they had found the twins. But they were going to make them pay for every step they took. We have to hit them first, Jacob said, his voice low and determined. We need to show them we're not just running. We need to hit their supply lines, cripple their reinforcements. If we can disrupt them, maybe we have a chance to escape for good. Luriel raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You're talking about attacking the Empire's forces head-on. You're not afraid of them. Jacob's eyes narrowed. I've fought empires before. We're not going to let them destroy what's left of Cathar. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about taking back what was stolen. Errol stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with the weight of her legacy. We're the last heirs. If we don't fight, if we don't take a stand, then Cathar is truly gone. The Empire will erase everything. Ro nodded. We can't just hide. We have to show them that we won't be silenced. Luriel studied the twins for a moment, then looked at Jacob. You've got a fire in you. I like that, but you're not just fighting for your lives anymore, are you? You're fighting for the entire galaxy. Jacob didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew what this was about now. This wasn't just about protecting the twins. It was about bringing down a regime that had crushed the hopes of entire worlds. It was about stopping them before they could do any more damage. I've got a plan, Luriel said, pulling Jacob's attention back to the map. We'll need to hit them fast, strike before they can fully mobilize. I've got contacts who can help with the sabotage, but we'll need a team. Jacob nodded. Get them. We'll do whatever it takes. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Luriel's hideout became a temporary base of operations, the small group of fighters gathering in the dark corners of the hangar. Luriel's contacts, a mix of mercenaries and rebels, came in one by one, each bringing their own skills to the table. They were a ragtag group, but they were united in a single purpose, to take down the Empire and protect the last heirs of Cathar. Jacob stood with Errol and Ray, watching as the others worked. The twins had come a long way from the scared children he had first met. They were strong now, ready to lead. Jacob had seen the change in them. The fire that burned in their hearts had ignited his own. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were warriors. "We're ready," Lirael said, walking up to Jacob. The teams assembled. "We move out in 1 hour." Jacob turned to the twins. "Are you sure about this?" Errol nodded, her eyes filled with the same determination that had been there from the start. "We have no choice. We fight now, or we lose everything." Ray stepped up beside her, his jaw set in determination. "We'll make them pay. For Cathar." Jacob's heart swelled with pride. These kids, these warriors, had become more than just his mission. They had become his allies, his family. They had a chance to change the galaxy. He couldn't let that slip away. The hours passed quickly, and soon they were on the move. The strike team gathered in the hangar, preparing for their assault. The night sky above them was heavy with clouds, but the stars shone through in places, as if watching over them. They would need all the luck they could get. The first target was a supply convoy, a fleet of ships carrying vital resources for the Empire's forces. Jacob's team would take it down, cutting off their reinforcements and crippling their supply lines. If they could hit hard and fast, they might be able to gain an advantage. As they boarded the vehicles and ships, Jacob's heart raced. They were about to make their move. It wasn't just about taking down the Empire's forces. It was about giving hope to the galaxy, showing everyone that the Empire could be beaten. Jacob glanced at Errol and Ray one last time. They were ready, and so was he. As the engines roared to life, Jacob felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment they'd been preparing for. The final stand. For Cathar. For the galaxy. For the future. The battle was about to begin.